So when the regional jural public validates some person as the right person to speak for country, what is the relationship they're actually recognising? Is it just, oh yeah, that's the child of old lady blah blah, or is there more to it?
Well, I think often there are lots of things lots of criteria that might go into that judgment. That's his father's country. He's the eldest brother. He got the right. Or he's not the eldest brother. He can't talk for that country because he misbehaved. We gave it to the second brother. Mm-hmm. And then giving it is to do with this, how you're favoured in ceremony. So you may, and what you get to know about the totems and the way in which you when you become an elder, are able to begin to steer things yourself. There are political decisions made about what dreaming a child has when it's conceived. There's arguments. There are records of people arguing about what totem, not only what totem, but which ancestor in that totemic dreaming this person is going to be named.
So it's not just kind of given; it's being interpreted and kind of contested.
It is, and it's been interpreted and it's been argued about. There's a lot in the literature that talks about spirit conception as random, it's not. It's not entirely random. There might be accidental things involved in it, but people are trying to get people onto certain areas and to guarantee their own succession for the future after they've gone, all those sorts of things. So it's very much a prestige game. And there are lots of ways of being connected to country apart from just through your mum, through your dad, through being conceived. You can come to basically control the dreamings of a country for other reasons. You can go and live on country that's not your own and then be treated as kin as a result of your long-term association there. And because you have lived in that country, you have been fed in that country, you have dwelt with other people of that country, they're going to say, you've got to be kin. You are kin.
Because you've taken the country in to yourself.
Yeah, and if that person is a marriageable person for someone in that group, they'll get reclassified. You can't marry that close.
So it's kind of always trying to weave these disparate threads back into the central narratives to keep the story kind of strong and cohesive.
Yeah, people, I mean, at that political level, I think people are very, very interested in the long-term reproduction of their
interests.
What we call descent line.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, people favour their children or the people to whom they're, who they're closest to.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that. A lot of that is happening.
There's a great quote from your paper where you said, as Strello puts it, a person sees in country beings he has known in his own experience as his fathers and grandfathers, and as we just said, brothers, and as his mothers and sisters. The whole countryside is his age-old family tree. And you added, it's also the family tree of other species that people routinely refer to as kin. When we create genealogies through native title research and we rely on commercial databases to depict these kinds of connections, what's at risk of being omitted? You've touched on some of these, but can you bring it back to family tree plus, maybe?
Well, what's missing, of course, is the story of people's lives. I once told I used to lecture on kinship, and you put put these genealogies on the board, and you say, what does that depict? And they say, well, family ancestry, all this. But it actually shows nothing more than a couple of people copulated or adopted or decided to adopt a child. That's about all. And some people, got together to do that. So that doesn't even show marriage, really. It shows two people who conjugated. Right? So it's a very bare framework. And there was an anthropologist who worked in New Guinea, now deceased, Tom Ernst, who once wrote a really good paper about what he called the misplaced concreteness of genealogies. So you think because you've got this kind of genealogical record, you think you can look at it and you can automatically tell who's got rights where. Well, you can do that if you think that, it's a patrilineal system. He must have, these rights. Maybe not. Maybe there's a story behind that about that person breaking the law. Perhaps he went to live in another country. Maybe he still reckons that's really my country, but effectively he's been alienated from it. This kind of fine-grained ethnography, of course, is very difficult to reproduce in native title contexts, but we know from fine-grained ethnography that these things happen. So with the Strelo quote, I often use that as a way of getting people to understand the religious dimensions of kinship. I think a lot of anthropologists would know, including those working in the rep bodies, people will do things like, go to a tree and say, that's him now, that's that old man, or that's where, or this is where old Bessie is. That's something along those lines. So when you're talking about your relations when they're alive, you've also got this idea that they're over there at the tree, or this water hole, or something to do with climbing that mountain or whatever. And when
Dana, who said that country encompasses the dead, the living, the unborn.
Yeah, that's right.
And you wrote that bloodlines are circular and they begin and end in the country. So obviously our family trees don't really go to that, and they don't go forward into the future of the unborn, and they don't go back to the source.
No, they're linear. They're very linear, and they don't capture the cyclic nature of the way that tenure operates. It can get quite complex, this notion of cycling, but there's one of the things I talk about in the Mother's Blood paper is about how they cycle through the alternate generations. Ideally, through alternate generations within the kinship system. So you should really come back to your grandfathers, your paternal grandfathers, totem all the time in these systems, or certainly to your paternal grandfather's country. And I've heard that said of a person, that he must come here to replace me. He must have replaced his grandfather.
Can I talk about here? So when you say here, I want to talk about differences between residence and home. You talked about this, you touched on it in your paper. When I listened to Nick's interview with Pascal, something he said about this jumped out, because he was referring to all the confusion in relation to the term hoard for groups in classical systems and whether they were land owning or land using. And he said, if you've got a system of ownership, does it mean nothing if people are not living on it? If they're living anywhere, it doesn't make sense having a system of patrilineal land ownership. Of course, Today, it's the minority of Indigenous people who are able to live on their traditional lands. And it got me thinking about cases I've worked on where a very big deal was made of non-residents. How do you see the religious dimension fitting into the contemporary picture in relation to residents and home?
What exactly is the big issue with non-residents that you're referring to?
I'm talking about the Badamai case, when particularly there was a huge amount of evidence led about the bitumen Badamai and the people that didn't live on Badamai country.
Okay, all right, I understand what you're getting at. The one thing I would say is that there have been native title cases where people have had their native title recognised in spite of the fact that they haven't been on country for a long time. Right?
Of course.
Because they're able to show that they have an ongoing connection off the country, even though they haven't been using it very much. And that is typically something to do with these ancestral matters. People have, I think in the DeRose case, this was particularly critical. People had kept their songs, they had kept knowledge of that country. They had even practiced some of their ritual, I believe, for that country in another place. So and may have been connected by other, by dreamings with another area where they were staying. But it didn't stop them having a connection to country. Now, in a sort of more post-classical situation, you often get this distinction between historical people and the old family people, and people complain about, the people have come from their country with us. They really belong back there, even though they've never been there, and they don't want to go back there because in order to make a living, they have to live here. Yeah. But people are often reluctant to give them the kind of local rights that they regard as their privilege. So those people have only their traditional connection, so to speak, with the country over there that they've not spent a lot of time on.
Where there may not be a school, a hospital, work, right, any facilities.
Yeah, all those sorts of things. But people are able to show, certainly in post-classical circumstances, that they do have some knowledge of that country, even if they don't spend a lot of time there. They do occasionally visit. They do, in some cases, they do have and have built up stories about where they come from and where their ancestors come from. They have residual knowledge about even, some local places and their dreamings and so on. So all those things are capable of being put forward as a connection, as a religious connection, if you like, to the ancestors in those places. I think we're going to go on and talk about the way knowledge gets attenuated, but what's kind of left at the end of that. But those are the sorts of predicaments where you get attenuation of local knowledge as opposed to being able to keep it quite vibrant.
Yeah. But we found that you can't just sometimes go out and say to people who haven't been able to access their country in the same way as another group may have been able to, give us your religious system, in a snappy sentence. So we had to really, Dave called it the lexicon of connection. We came to be alert to these key words where people were evoking their religious connections to country that they'd been removed from. They were talking about home, as you discussed, belonging, safety, being owned, feeling good, and embodied experiences, and having intimate knowledge of places. It wasn't given to you in a package, but we through drawing those things out, felt,
Exactly.
well, that describes religious connection.
Yeah. And lawyers often ask questions, pertinent questions to people about, how do you know when you're on your country? And people will just say, I know because I suddenly feel comfortable. I know. And if you're lucky enough, they might elaborate on that a bit more and tell you that the reason they feel comfortable is they know how to behave there, and they know that their ancestors are looking after them. They know that old people, some of their old people are there.
And that they're known by the country, they're recognised.
Yeah, they're recognised by the country. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And people will be on the lookout for signs of that all the time. All the time. And then they'll regard those signs as proof of their connection.
Yes.
And I think that's a very powerful thing.
Yeah. I love those stories when people say, I come up over that hill and the whole feeling changes and I just know I'm home and know, I see that place and,
And in the old days, it may not happen so much now, maybe it does, but, people literally used to cry for their country when they've been away for a long time.
Yeah.
I've witnessed that. I watched an old senile old fellow once brought back to his country because we found some sacred objects in the hills. They went and got him. He couldn't speak. He was wobbly. They brought him into camp. He kind of sprung into life as soon as his feet touched the ground out in the Toyota. And then, although he never spoke, he sang all night with people around the campfire. He knew all the songs still. This is a man who's senile and can't remember anything.
Yeah, it's special.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the legacy of Yorta Yorta, the decision and the tendency of courts and sometimes states to take a tick box approach to continuity of connection. So were there totems before, tick, and are there totems observed now, cross? We face the challenge with the Gascoyne claims in WA, which have been entirely blanketed with pastoral stations for 150 years, of trying to model continuity in a way that was honest about what we came up with as adaptations, transformations, you said attenuations, aggregations, but also drew out those threads to illustrate where possible that while some systemic elements may seem to have changed, they're still fundamentally the same thing. So whether it's the mythic ancestors, the kangaroo totem, or the old people, the nature of that essential connection is the same. And I know that we talked about this too in relation to the Yamaji Nation claims when you wrote that report. Talk to me about how we get down to the roots of native title rights.
I guess you always have to keep in mind is there's a relationship between kin and country. So family and country, but bearing in mind what I've said earlier is that just don't think about family just in the way that we think about family. Add something to it. Yeah. Add something about this kind of, if you like, this mystical, a certain sort of mystical orientation to one's relatives. People who have visions and all the rest of it and see things and can do so. And I think, in a sense, one of the components of that is that you have family, you have living family, of course, and you have relatives who you have known, and you have some defined area of country that you regard as your own. It's generally associated with a language which people may still use even if they don't speak it, in a sense, but by which I mean use as an identifier, as a name. And then there's the ancestral, what I've just broadly called the ancestral aspect to it, which is the plus bit, really.
Can I show your beautiful...
Yeah.
schema. So we had one for Nelly that was quite complex in terms of moving down through time, but trying to show that connection from the totemic patriclans down to language groups and families as we talk about it today. And yours, which was achieved a similar thing, but it was a slightly less directions of arrows. Talk through what you're saying about the ancestors.
Less busy is what I would say. I found that one a little busy. So I thought this was, in a sense, a simplification of the same notions.
Yes.
So I put those 4 things that I mentioned here: language, family groups, land, and ancestors. So you can put that, I've put that in a sort of threefold sequence, really saying there's been a diminution of all the, the kind of complexity of all those things. But there is a residue. That residue is not nothing.
Yeah.
That residue assumes great importance in people's lives, a lot of people's lives anyway. You would have to say that in post-classical circumstances. You wouldn't want to say that everybody is necessarily, takes great interest in the sort of continuity issue, but a lot do. And they're always the ones that are pursuing native title, or at least helping to pursue native title by working with the anthropologists who need to be able to provide the proof. So although you get this attenuation right the way through, including of the, the ability to be able to connect to ancestors that you have not known, but can know you, and you can therefore kind of know, that you get that sort of transformation, and what's left is what's left. That's what connects people to country, and they say it's their country. And I've put down the side what I actually got from Peter Sutton at some stage about the 3 sort of essential qualities of the continuity, that the continuity is ancestral, that the country remains ancestral country, that it is held communally. You don't get private property on it, or individuals owning particular places, except through Western kind of ways of carving up the land. And it's inalienable, which is related to that. It's something you can't sell it, you can't just dispose of it on the market, although you might be forced to. You might be forced to and be compensated because of the whitefellow regime, but under normal circumstances, it's inalienable. You can't be divorced from it.
Thanks, John. Yeah. We could probably spend another whole episode just discussing the schemas. Let's finish. I want to ask you to finish up that in your paper you cite MacDonald, who talks about the increasing secularization of connection to country. It seems to me that in the midst of growing secularization across Australia generally, there's also a slow growing reverence for Indigenous worldviews, at least anecdotally. So I'm wondering, how do you reconcile that on a personal level when you're doing native title research?
Yeah, well, I could say something about MacDonald's paper. I think but I'll say it very briefly. I don't think her experience of the riverine quite gels with mine. I'd be very surprised if it's been entirely secularized there. So I doubt that an aspect of that. But as for my experience, I mean, I think summarizing how I manage interactions with people when when they're kind of telling me that because I'm not a black fella, I wouldn't understand that I could spend time with my grandmother last night, even though she's been dead 40 years. Or when you know that somebody has interfered with you in some way, made you sick or whatever because you took something from a place. That kind of thing. Now, I think I've been subject to some of those things. I have had experiences which have been interpreted by Aboriginal people as spirits affecting me, doing stuff to me. Once I would say violated a bit of trust at a sacred site and paid the consequences.
Can you tell that story you told us in that training, that great story of running when you didn't have a sore knee when you were running?
Yeah. Look, I went to a sacred site when I shouldn't have, and I was before I got there, I was sort of overcome by this weird buzzing in my ear. I was out on a jog. Went to look for this place, and when I got near it, I got that odd buzzing in my ear that I thought was a cicada or something, but I couldn't find it, but the noise wouldn't go away, and I got frightened and I ran away. And I ran away at full pelt too, so I was freaked, and I was later told, because I had previously been told not to go there on my own.
What did they tell? What was the warning?
And the warning was that I would get that, and the word was scruffed by the spirits. And so I think I was scruffed by the spirits. And when I went to see the old fellow afterwards, he said, "Well, Doc, we did tell you not to go there." Like very matter of fact. But I think there's a serious point here about, which goes back to what we started with right at the beginning about how you characterise people's relationships to land. For white fellas, it's an ontological challenge, particularly, I'd say, for lawyers. Perhaps less so for anthropologists. It's an ontological challenge. Aboriginal people are open to certain kinds of experiences on the whole that we are not. The ontological gap between Aboriginal reality and general white fella reality is quite profound. It's not just ideas or whatever, or this is the way they think, this is the way I think. Because these ideas are capable of transforming themselves into experience. I'm not very open to that experience, but that moment.
Not completely closed either.
Not completely closed either. And what I would characterise is, like most people, I'm prone to rationalist embarrassment in these situations. But at that moment, I just let my inner self tell me what to do. I ran.
Be careful if you're running through Bundjalung National Park. That's the moral of the story.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, John. I hope we've brought the horse and the cart along with us through this meandering discussion, which I've really enjoyed.
Thank you, Carmen.
And take care, everybody. Thanks for listening. Don't get scruffed.